So Jared asked me to talk about genetic genealogy in Munster with an emphasis on County Clare, and Marie is going to talk about County Cork later on. So we have a number of DNA projects related to County Clare, county-wide projects and surname projects. And I got involved in all this stuff in 2013 when I went to the first Genetic Genealogy Ireland conference in the Royal Dublin Society in Dublin. That's the first time I met Gerard. And that was where I was first persuaded to swab by Catherine Borges of the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. And when my matches came back, I was very disappointed that I only knew two of them. And one was Gerard. And 10 years on, we still have no idea how we're related. And the other was a lady called Terry Fitzgerald in Seattle. And at least I know that her McNamara ancestors and my McNamara ancestors lived within a stone's throw of each other in West Clare. But hers were there forever, and mine were blow-ins, so only came there in 1876, and we still don't know how we're related. But I have discovered about 200 DNA matches since then, to whom I do know my relationship. So in 2016, Maurice Gleeson, who organised the Dublin conferences, which carried on until COVID put a stop to them, so I guess we had 7 years in Dublin and a couple in Belfast as well in between times. Maurice came to give us a talk in Ennis, where I was one of the founder members of the Clare Roots Society. And I went off on a solo run and I set up the Clare Roots DNA project at Family Tree DNA. It now has 1,915 members, which is a very nice critical mass, especially when it comes to looking at Y DNA matches. And I'll show you some of that later on. And these projects have many benefits of membership, which I lay out on the home page. We have an activity feed, which is like a Facebook discussion group, but it's not as active as many of the Facebook groups that have been talked about earlier. You can search your matches for matches who belong to the same project as you with the Advanced Matches tool. That's very useful. I mainly use it for Y DNA subgrouping. As you probably all know, the Y chromosome goes from father to son like the surname. And we can trace back to things like L21 that were talked about earlier, mutations that happened thousands of years ago, long before surnames were adopted. We also have surname lists, which I'll show you in a second. And these projects are a great way of sponsoring DNA kits. So some of my great successes have come from people in places like California, the late Tom Carney, who donated money to the project and asked me, could I recruit some of his cousins or potential cousins to swab back home in County Clare. His ancestors had emigrated from Clare to Sandy Hook in Connecticut. And that's what we find with DNA matching. Sandy Hook, a lot of you might remember from the horrible school shooting there about 10 years ago. But that was the destination for hundreds, if not thousands, of people from West Clare who emigrated to work in a rubber factory in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Lots of their descendants show up in the matches of present-day West Clare people. Just down the road, Danbury, Connecticut, was the hat capital of America. It had a number of large hat factories. Again, we get lots of matches between the descendants of the Danbury diaspora who left Clare 100 and more years ago and the present-day residents of Clare. I did set up one or two Facebook groups, not as many as Martin Curley did, but one of those is The Loop from Clare to Connecticut, which helps a lot with the tracing of that particular chain migration. This is what I do with the Y-DNA results in the Clare Roots project, and it's not too slow to load. The Wi-Fi is quite good. I just group people by their haplogroups. When we started analysing the Y chromosome about 20 years ago, it was considered that the letters of the alphabet were more than enough to label the different types of Y chromosomes that were found around the world. A up to about, or I'm not even sure where even S and T used. Now, where we had less than 20 years ago, we have about 50,000 Y chromosome mutations. And some of those are specific to surnames, and we'll see later within surnames we have Y chromosome mutations that are even specific to a particular parish within a surname group. So these are in alphabetical order. We start with haplogroup E. All the stuff over on the right are the STR mutations, which were state-of-the-art 20 years ago. They have now been supplanted by the SNP mutations, which appear in this haplogroup column. Those with a green result have actually paid to have their SNP mutations analysed. Those with a red result are predicted on the basis of the older STR mutations. So I just group them. So if we take somebody like this, Mr. Cocard, he's from haplogroup E. His most recent confirmed mutation is BY6420, which might have occurred in his father or grandfather or in recent generations. A few generations before that, one of his ancestors had the BY6203 mutation. Some ancestor a few generations before that had BY6357 and so on. So this is like a family tree, except the nodes on the tree are the Y chromosome mutations rather than individual people. And typically we expect to see one of these mutations maybe every couple of 100 years, every 3 or 4 or 5 generations. So I'll show you a similar chart for a surname project before I finish. Martin talked about the GEDmatch ancestor projects. There is one for County Clare. I'm not a great fan of these because they lead to lots of people spamming you saying, I have a 7 centimorgan match with you in an ancestor project, and there's no way you're going to be able to trace every 7 centimorgan match. This is our County Clare Facebook group. It's not quite as big as Martin's. It's only 6,100 members at the moment. So if you have County Clare roots and you are on Facebook, you should join that group. But the Ancestor Project did come in, hit the jackpot, we'll say, about 3 years ago when I wrote this Tale of Two X Chromosomes. My good friend Martin Halpin was contacted by a lady called Kathleen Flanagan, who said, we have an 80 centimorgan match in the County Clare group. We had no idea what County Clare group she was talking about. Was it an 80 centimorgan match? So that's quite a substantial match that we should be able to find the relationship behind. It turned out that the match was on the X chromosome, one of the sex chromosomes. It was not reported as a match by Ancestry. It was not reported as a match by MyHeritage. It was not reported on the one-to-many autosomal matching by GEDmatch. It was not reported as a match by family tree DNA. But these ancestor groups look at the X chromosome. And with a huge match like that, about a third or a half of the X chromosome, it wasn't too difficult to figure out how they were related. And it turned out we were able to go back 2 additional generations on their ancestors because we knew we only had to trace the X chromosome lineage. The X chromosome cannot pass through 2 consecutive males. A male passes on a Y chromosome to his sons, but women get 2 X chromosomes, 1 from each parent. Males get 1 X chromosome from their mother. So that's a long story. It's all there on my Facebook page if you want to read about it. So that's the saving grace of the GEDmatch county ancestor groups. Another way that we meet people from County Clare is through Ireland Reaching Out. I know Gerard was a big fan of this when it started off a few years ago. I think we saw him on TG Cahir on Torrawallia. Wasn't that the name of the series? So I have written up a guide to the parish of Mayarta in West Clare. That's the parish where my grandmother was born. Just outlining all the different sources, what dates the records survive from, the different townlands, the differences between the Catholic parish and the civil parish, the local graveyards, lots of stuff that you can read there at your leisure. And that occasionally attracts people to contact me. And sometimes they have had their DNA analysed, sometimes they have not. I met a couple from England last week. She was Shaughnessy by birth. We call it Shaughnessy in County Clare. If you cross the River Shannon to West Limerick, they call it Shaughnessy. But her Shaughnessy great-grandfather married a woman called Purcell, and I managed to find, I had this open, but I just clicked the link there, which takes a little longer to open it. I managed to find her great-great-grandfather's death record based on what she told me. Here he is, number 496, Martin Purcell, whose son-in-law was a Shaughnessy. He was a married man, age 70, a labourer, died of old age in Frore, which the locals spell F-R-O-O-R. The Ordnance Survey decided it was F-U-R-R-O-R, and it's actually divided into Frore Upper and Frore Lower. It's just west of Kilkee on the road to Loop Head, and his son John Purcell was present at his death. So for this lady, I put together when she arrived a nice little family tree of the Purcells who lived around Kilkee. And then when she arrived, I discovered she had sent her DNA to Ancestry. And I said, would you mind sharing your Ancestry match list with me, which she was quite happy to do. And I said, let's search your Ancestry matches for people with ancestors in County Clare. And I recognized the name of her second closest match. And I said, let's look up this lady in my database. I have a very large database. It's now 230,000 people or something, mostly from County Clare. And I discovered her DNA match, who I found just by searching for the place, not for the name, was descended from this couple in the second marriage there, number 84, Thomas Burke and Mary Purcell. And Mary Purcell lived in Quilty East, which is 2 parishes about 20 miles north of Frore, where Martin Purcell died. But her father was also Martin Purcell, and he was a herd. And herds in the 19th century generally worked for different farmers at different times and were much more mobile than the average County Clare person. And because there was a significant DNA match, I have no doubt that this Martin Purcell, whose daughter married in Quilty in 1880, is the same person as this Martin Purcell who died in Frore 4 years later in 1884. And I looked at the tree of the DNA match. She hadn't even gone back as far as the Purcells. We would never have found her if we had searched for Purcell. And then I looked at my family tree of the other Purcell family, and I said, oh, I know some of these people. And I took the 2 visitors out to lunch, and I knew one of the Purcell descendants was a carpenter who had done a lot of work for Gleason's shop in Kilrush. And as we came back for lunch, there was the carpenter working on the shop front in Gleason's shop. And I said, would you like to meet your cousin? And we walked up to Shannon, and he met his third cousin who had just arrived in Kilrush that morning from England. And they were delighted to meet each other. So that sort of thing gives great satisfaction and encourages me to keep going. As well as that county-wide project, I'm involved in a number of surname-specific projects. The only problem with this is the difficulty in persuading people to sign up, especially for Y-DNA analysis, especially for the big Y700 analysis. I still don't understand why it costs sometimes as little as $40 or $50 to have your 22 pairs of autosomal chromosomes analyzed, and it still costs $449 to have one Y chromosome analyzed. And that price barrier is restricting the success of genetic genealogy in general. I don't know how we'll ever get it to come down. It may be significant that there's only one company doing Y chromosome matching, family tree DNA. There are a number of competing companies doing autosomal DNA matching. The monopoly has the high price, the competitive market has the low price. So if there is anyone here, or you know of anyone who is a Clare, a Clancy, a Marinan, a McInerney, a McNamara, an O'Dea, a Sarsfield, or a Sexton, I will arrange a $100 discount on the big Y price if you can persuade them to sign up. So I'm involved to greater or lesser extents in surname projects for all of these surnames. I have a Clancy ancestor, a McNamara ancestor, and an O'D ancestor. Gerard earlier mentioned the Sarsfield project. I got involved in the Cahir project because I was contacted by Jerry Cahir, who lives down in Rossgray and who's desperate to know the history of his quite rare surname. So recently I set up a Wikitree project. So part of what I want to do today is try and convince people of the value of wikitree.com. It's like Wikipedia for genealogists. It's a single world tree where every person who ever lived, in theory, has a single profile, no duplicates. It's open source. You sign the honor code. If you find a mistake, you can edit it and fix it. And it has wonderful DNA features. And it also has one-name studies. So I already had a success this morning before I came out. I said, let's look at the Cahirs who are already listed on Wikitree. As of yesterday, there are 13 million people dead and alive listed on Wikitree, all somehow connected to each other by blood or by marriage. And then there were strays that are not yet connected to this single world tree. There is a parallel website called Wikitree Plus. And if we go to the Wikitree Plus page, you can do advanced searches. So I'm looking for the end-of-line Cahirs on Wikitree. So I'm looking for people whose last name at birth was Cahir and who have no father on Wikitree. And if I click the Get Profiles button, I get a list of 22 such people. Everyone on Wikitree, when they're added, gets an ID, which consists of the last name at birth and then a number indicating the order in which they were added. So this search gives them in the order in which they were added to Wikitree. And I noticed, since I've been on before, this new guy had shown up, Lawrence Cahir in Australia, and I sent him a message at 9 o'clock this morning, and at 9:30 he came back and said, yes, I'd love to get involved in your DNA project. So the miracles of Wikitree. Hopefully he will follow through. And there's two objectives to having a surname project like this on Wikitree. The first is to reduce the number of end-of-line ancestors by finding a common ancestor. So if every Cahir is descended from the first man who ever adopted the Cahir surname, then we should be able to trace all 22 of these people back to that first ever Cahir. And I've only one result for this. The other objective is to recruit all the Cahirs in the world into the project, and they won't necessarily initially be able to trace back to that single common ancestor. So we will be increasing the number of hits on this search. So it doesn't really matter whether it goes up or goes down, we're having success. Wikipedia was not so interested in the Cahir surname. So Luke McInerney, a great medieval historian of County Clare, drafted this history of the Cahir surname and wanted to publish it as a Wikitree page, but I'm going to have to integrate that with my... He wanted to publish it as a Wikipedia page. I want to integrate it with my Wikitree project. The Guild of One-Name Studies, or Goons, has a project for the surname Keher, K-E-I-G-H-E-R. The surname dictionaries say Cahir and Keher are variants of the same original surname. The DNA results don't quite support that. We have two Cahirs with Y DNA results. They don't match each other. And the Kehirs don't match either of them. And there is a Cahir project on family tree DNA, but it only has 4 members. And a small group like that isn't really worth having a separate project for, so I haven't been pushing that one too much. The McNamaras have an active Facebook page. We've been begging, please sign up for Big Y testing, and it hasn't worked. But hopefully we'll get some candidates in due course. The Sarsfield project, the objective is to find the remains of Patrick Sarsfield, the hero of the Siege of Limerick in the late 1600s. He died of wounds received in battle in a place called Huy, H-U-Y, which is now in Belgium, a couple of years later. This is Loic Guillon, who's the head of French in Mary Immaculate College in Limerick and the French consul in the Midwest, or in Limerick. and he believes he has found Sarsfield's burial place in Belgium, and he has raised funding to carry out an archaeological excavation. You probably heard the story of Richard III, who was dug up from his burial place in Leicester in England, and whose identity was confirmed by a mixture of historical and circumstantial and genetic evidence. So Lloyd's hope is that he will find remains which match the physical description of Sarsfield, will be able to extract DNA from the remains, and will be able to extract the Y chromosome, and will find that it matches to living Sarsfields in Ireland. So that's why there's a bonus for anyone who knows a living Sarsfield who will sign up for Big Y, and also to extract Sarsfield's mitochondrial DNA and hope to find a connection to people related to Sarsfields through all female lines.
Could I just add a small insert there? I mentioned in my talk about two of the survivors of the massacre of Mullaghmast. One was Rory O'Gomorga, the chief
who appears in Sarsfield's pedigree.
Who is the grandfather of Patrick Sarsfield.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, grandfather of Patrick
That's
Sarsfield.
interesting. We have to talk about that.
We need to find Rory O'Moore's female line descendants, because, or at least his wife's female line descendants, because his daughter was Sarsfield's mother.
Wasn't no more, right? His mother, but not on the
mother's side.
not on the paternal side.
His brother's daughter.
His wife was a Burke, and his mother was a no more.
I will come back to Sarsfield in a minute. There's also a sexton project on Facebook, which I got roped into for whatever reason, I don't know, because I don't have any close sexton connections, specific to Killernan, which is a townland, Kilmurray Bricken, which is a parish, Kilrush, which is the Superintendent Registrar's District, and Kilmaley, all in West Clare. And the reason I put that up is because when I sat down the other day to prepare this talk, instead I answered a query in the sexton group, and I discovered that the match between a sexton and an OD, which I was asked to explain, had nothing to do with either the sexton father or the OD father. The two men were related through their mothers, who both had roots in County Mayo, and the common ancestral surname was Lally. So when I reported on this, I said, these are the morals that we must remember. Our autosomal DNA, the 22 pairs of chromosomes that we get half from our father and half from our mother, does not follow surnames. If you trace your autosomal DNA segments back through time, eventually they will descend from the mother in some ancestral couple, and the surname will change. It's as inevitable as if you toss a coin repeatedly and think you're going to make a fortune by always betting on heads, tails will eventually come up. But what we discovered in this case, the two parties had ancestors in the same parish in County Mayo, Kilmore Erris, away up on the northwest corner of County Mayo. And our autosomal DNA segments are much more likely to remain in the same parish for generations or for centuries than to remain in the same surname. And that is why we talk about ethnicity and endogamy. Ethnicity is supposed to be a good thing, because we can tell people where their ancestors lived, because people didn't move around very much in the past. Endogamy is supposed to be a bad thing, because if people didn't move around, they ended up marrying their cousins, close or distant, and it becomes hard to figure out exactly which ancestor is the source of which DNA segment. But endogamy and ethnicity are just two sides of the same coin. And the third lesson from this thing is, don't jump to the conclusion because there is an ancestral surname in common or an ancestral place in common that is the source of the DNA match. Look at your triangulated matches. Look at the other people who share the DNA segment that Mr. OD and Mr. Sexton share. And that's your starting point. And in this case, the other man who shared the DNA segment was also a man with roots in County Mayo, and I traced back his Lally ancestors and Mr. O'D's Lally ancestors, and they're second cousins twice removed, and Mr. Sexton's Mayo ancestors lived in the same parish at the same time. Didn't quite find the Lally connection, but I'm quite sure that that DNA match It's not a County Clare match, it's a County Mayo match. So why do we have projects? To help the project members to trace a genetic heritage, whether it be of their county or their surname, and look at ancestral migrations. We've heard lots about that earlier today. To find their place in the haplotrees, and this is one value of projects, and in particular of large projects. I've been timed out now, but luckily I have this page open over here. This is Family Tree DNA's idea of moving into the modern world. This page still assumes that we're all doing Y-DNA 12 analysis, which has been out of date for 20 years. But if I go over to one I prepared earlier, Y-DNA genetic distance, these are my matches within the County Clare project on the Y chromosome at 111 markers. I normally would only see my matches out to a genetic distance of 10 differences out of 111 markers. My closest match within the project is 23 out of 111. I don't have any matches at 10 out of 111 anywhere in the world, anywhere on Family Tree DNA. I may have some a little closer than 23. My Waldron ancestors were not from County Clare, so I wouldn't expect my Waldron matches to be in the County Clare project anyway. Waldrons first came to County Clare and the Royal Irish Constabulary appointed my great-grandfather to serve in County Clare in the 1870s or 1880s. And as soon as he married a young lady from 6 Mile Bridge, under the rules of the time, he was transferred to another county, and his children were born in Thurles and Nina and Emly and Limerick and other parts of Munster. And all I can really say with confidence, well, I can say my DNA, my most recent confirmed mutation is FGC 29367. And way back, I descend from U106, which is about 5,000 years old, which accounts for a huge part of the European population, not as big as the L21s we talked about earlier. And sure enough, my 3 closest matches are in the U106 branch of the tree. And these are assignments I have made within the project, and if I don't like them, I can just click there, and eventually it will allow me to move somebody to another group. But this is how I use the project to predict what branch of the tree the people who've only bought the outdated STR analysis belong to. And where's it gone? There is the other one that I opened earlier for Mr. Caher. And if I search that for L1336, you'll see that he has matches within 8 or 9 differences, and every match he has out to a difference of 23 are all either confirmed by Family Tree DNA or predicted by me to belong to this L1336 branch of the tree, and we call that the Clans of North Clare branch. It includes, you can see the surnames on the left-hand side, Considine, O'Loughlin, Carmody, Marinan, which I'll come back to later, all surnames associated with Corcomroe Barony in northwest Clare. And that's one of the 2 commonest Y-DNA mutations in County Clare. The other is L226, which we consider the Dalcashan mutation. The Dalgash were the ancient people of County Clare. Their leader was Brian Boru. His descendants, the O'Briens, claim to have the oldest surname in the world. And most O'Briens have that L226 mutation. Brian Boru's father was Canada. O'Canada is the Irish for Kennedy. The Kennedys also claim to be Dalcashans. Many Kennedys also have that L226 mutation. Anyway, we don't want to look at the 12 marker thing. I try and encourage, even though this project is on Family Tree DNA, I try and encourage everyone that I talk to about DNA matching to fish in all the gene pools. There are 6 major companies: Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, Family Tree DNA, GEDmatch, which doesn't actually have a laboratory, it just takes data files from the other companies. And I wouldn't normally have put living DNA on this list, because it has been promising things for many years that it has failed to deliver. But thanks to Roberta Estes, one of the most active DNA bloggers, I learned yesterday, finally Living DNA has come up with its chromosome browser. So it's getting there, 7 years after it promised. And it is always worth uploading there because of what I call Murphy's Law of genetic genealogy. I helped an adoptee, a Mrs. Murphy, a number of years ago, and she was in 5 of those 6 websites, but she wasn't yet on 23andMe. She had a full brother, and he was on 23andMe, and he wasn't on any of the others. So that's Murphy's Law. If you're looking for a long-lost relative, they're bound to be in the one website that you're not on yet. So make sure you're on all 6. DNA Painter, I will go back. I have that one open earlier just to show you. It has been mentioned earlier as my DNA Painter profile. I fiddled with the settings when I set up my own DNA Painter profile, and I included far too many small segments and it takes way too long to load. So I said I would start with my first cousin's profile, and instead of listing your matches by the closest relative first, DNA Painter lists them chromosome by chromosome. So if we just scroll down to chromosome 22, which is the smallest chromosome, here are all my first cousin's matches on chromosome 22, listed by the start location. So the people whose matches overlap, in theory, all have a common ancestor with you and with each other. They're the small ones that I have not identified, but down at the bottom, there's myself as a match to my first cousin. There's our parents' half first cousin. And here's a load of people that Family Tree DNA have been able to tell us by its intelligent analysis of the family trees are also related on my father's and my first cousin's maternal side, but we don't know exactly how. So the idea of DNA Painter is to assign every segment, every matching segment, to the most distant individual ancestor from whom it came. So these blue ones are assigned by my cousin to his mother, Maura the Waldron, and the purple ones are assigned to his mother's mother, Mary Ann McNamara. There's different notations you can use to avoid confusion if you have many Thomas Waldrons or John Smiths or whatever in your ancestry. One is this mother's mother's father's mother type notation. The other is just an Anantafel numbering scheme where I'm number 1, my father is number 2, my mother is number 3, my grandparents are 4, 5, 6, and 7. I use that on DNA Painter as well. We could give a whole talk in DNA Painter. How am I doing for time? I want to be finishing up. I've talked enough about Wikitree. There are all the links. If I have persuaded you, you should sign up. If I haven't, maybe if we just look at Patrick Sarsfield's mitochondrial relatives, the people who, in theory, share mitochondrial DNA with Sarsfield. Unfortunately, they don't come down much more recent than Sarsfield himself. His most distant known female line ancestor is Ellen, and we don't even see in this, we have to scroll up, Eleanor Griffith, whose husband was Bagnall, and there's a very small number of her female line descendants. But Wikitree has all these wonderful DNA tools. This just shows us the descendants who would share Eleanor's mitochondrial DNA. There's Sarsfield, who is her great-great-grandson. His mother was O'Moore, his grandfather was Rory O'Moore, who Paul talked about earlier. And in fact, so far, there is nobody even as recent as Sarsfield himself connected to the tree. We're just hoping, if we find the remains, if we extract the mitochondrial DNA, if we look at the matches, we may be able to trace the matches back to the 1500s and link up with this tree. It would be an enormous project to take all these people and try and trace their female line descendants down to the present day. Maybe we'll get funding to do that, but I said that would take the rest of my life to do.
Just I was at the lecture this week, 2 days ago, with Lloyd in the Alliance Française in Dublin, and he announced he'd reached the target 15,000 for this first stage, and I introduced Carolyn, the healthcare company.
The sponsors.
They matched the funding, so they've 30,000.
Brilliant.
And the target is 90,000. So they should get the target.
As I said, WikiTree allows you to correct other people's mistakes. Ancestry gives you common ancestor hints. Ancestry's wonderful business model is when a new customer signs up, they say, fill in your parents and your grandparents. If you don't know, just guess. And then they sell those guesses as hints to their other customers, and they don't try and correct the wrong guesses. MyHeritage, you can label its guesses as confirmed or rejected, but they still sit there looking at you as rejected. So a few other things that are going on in the DNA world recently. This may or may not open up. We had, wouldn't open up when I tried it earlier. I was up in this part of the world last weekend as part of the Kennedy clan gathering, which I was roped into a few years ago, even though my closest Kennedy ancestor is about 11 generations back. And Brian Kennedy from Australia, who's been coming to Ireland every year for 30 odd years organising these gatherings, and his son have just produced this book on their DNA roots, which they were surprised to find there were not Dalcatian Kennedys, but there are many other Kennedy dynasties in Ireland. We were talking about Coughlin's earlier. On Monday, we had the unveiling of a statue of Brendan O'Regan in 6 Mile Bridge in County Clare. He's the man who invented everything from duty-free shops to Irish coffee to Shannon Airport. Contributed hugely to economic development. His statue by Seamus Connolly from Kilbaha in West Clare, probably Ireland's best sculptor when it comes to lifestyle bronzes. You might know the one of John B. Keane in Listowel. There's me under my umbrella lurking in the background in the rain. I went back when the rain stopped and the Irish coffees were all drunk to have a proper look at the statue, and I bumped into Brendan's son, who was doing the same thing. And he said, oh, somebody walked up to me and handed me a family tree of my Coughlin ancestors that goes back 2 generations further than I've ever gone before. So I did a little research and I found Brendan's grandmother, Margaret Coughlin, according to the census returns, was born in County Clare, but it looks like her family came across the river from Mungret in North Limerick, and maybe some of you Coughlin experts will be able to claim a relationship to him. Clare Genealogy has been in the news all over the place this week. I hope you all watch Who Do You Think You Are? Did you see this week's episode with Dev Griffin, who came to Kilkee and Carrigaholt, where his ancestors came from? I think I got my name on the credits, but they didn't want me to appear on screen. I'm also involved in Kilrush and District Historical Society. Any Marinans in the room? No?
No, but there is a Marinan living in town. I never heard the name before.
Well, it is very much a West Clare name. It has the best surname project that I have come across.
He probably knows that. Yeah.
He knows that. We eventually got him involved. His 3 children are the administrators of the Facebook group.
Oh.
And this is the DNA project. And I have coloured in different shades of yellow because FTDNA changed the colour scheme a couple of years ago and the colours don't quite match the various groups. This is what a surname project should look like. We do have a couple of cuckoos in the nest. We have a descendant of the Marinans of Quinn, who is from haplogroup E, which is totally unlike anyone else in Clare. We have 2 descendants of Marinans, probably from around Quilty, I think, or I think the Basil Brack group, Y5061, is probably the best known mutation. And then we have 27 Marinan men, all of whom are not only in the L1336 clans of North Clare group, but all test positive for the BY19489 mutation. And within that, we have 6 subgroups with more recent mutations than BY19489, which is probably about 300 years old. And this one is associated with the parishes of Kilkee and Doonbeg. This one is associated with Carrickody, which, as Micheál Martin sings in his famous song when he's asked, "Where are you from?" between Milltown and Sweet Ennistimon. These are all associated with up around Milltown Malbay. These are all associated with Doonbeg, Clare area. These are all down around Kilkee. So basically we have a mutation for every parish, and if we get a Marinin man who doesn't know what parish his ancestors are from, and he does the big Y test, we can direct him to the relevant parish. And the Marinins have their big gathering in Ennistimon at the end of August. And almost last, I said I'd come up with some of the links between County Clare and Banagher. We're getting a new bridge in Killaloe, where I live. We're 180 years behind Banagher, which I understood got its bridge back in 1843. We're both dependent on the ESB. We've Ardnacrusha down the river and Money Point further down. The late, great Brian Goggin delighted in telling us of the trade route from Kilrush in West Clare to Liverpool and London in the 19th century in the golden era of the canals. In those days, I could have got on a steamer in Killaloe this morning and probably gotten off in Banagher this afternoon. Probably wouldn't have been quite as fast as driving up. We have a Palliser house in Killaloe because Anthony Trollope lived in Killaloe, I think, before he came to Banagher. We have a famous Clare artist, William Mulready, who didn't quite invent the postage stamp, which took off. He invented the prepaid letter form envelope that didn't take off, that was also launched in 1840 when Trollope was involved in setting up the penny post. And we have like you have Petrie up here, we have our own great historian Eugene O'Curry, who was involved in compiling the Ordnance Survey name books, etc., from Dunaha in West Clare. And finally, I was asked if there's anyone here who wants to write a paper. I was asked to give a plug by Helen Sculler, who's editing a special issue of the journal Genealogy on ethics and family history, challenges, dilemmas, and responsibilities. You have until the end of November to get your articles in for that. And finally, my standard, why you should submit your DNA talk. The more people we recruit, the more successful we'll be. There are significant externalities for other people. It's not just you who will benefit, it's even people who are not related to you, because you may be able to separate somebody else's matches into paternal and maternal side. You might be a paternal relation. Being able to dismiss your relationship will help work out something on the maternal side. And your descendants will be eternally grateful to you for leaving them your DNA. We all wish our ancestors had left us their DNA. Do unto your descendants as you wish your ancestors had done unto you. And there's a link there for those who are not on all the DNA websites to some of the technical details of how to copy your results across.